Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the Railway. Today I want to find out once and for all who made the best Lowmac. So just to catch you up on the situation, a few weeks ago Rapido released their brand new Lowmac wagon, and I reviewed that model and I thought it was a good model, and as far as I knew that was the end of that. But it wasn't, because almost immediately after Rapido's release, right out of the blue, Clark Railworks announced and released their own Lowmac wagon, which was more expensive and so presumably more premium. So I talked about this briefly on my last Model Railway News episode, and I gave some of my thoughts on this, and it was clear from that that there was a lot of interest in this situation. A lot of people weighed in on the debate in the comments. A lot of people thought Rapido's was the best, a lot of people thought Ellis Clark's was the best. Everyone was giving their thoughts on why they thought what they thought. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to buy the Ellis Clark one as well. I'm going to do a proper comparison, see what the differences and the similarities are, and try and figure out which one is truly the best. So I bought this, an Ellis Clark Lowmac. So this means I've got one of each and I can look at each of them at the same time. So the price of the Ellis Clark Lowmac is £40. It is available directly from Ellis Clark, and now more recently Rails of Sheffield are stocking Ellis Clark items, so you can also pick these up from Rails at the same price at £40. The Rapido Lowmac is cheaper though, at £33.95 at the retailers. So that's £6 cheaper. In terms of percentages, that is quite a lot. So if everything else is equal, Rapido is the winner at the moment. But what is the Ellis Clark Lowmac like? I need to get up to speed with this one first, so I'm going to get this out and take a look. And if you'd like to try any of these Lowmac wagons for yourself, I do have affiliate links in the description. Okay, let's give it a try. Okay, the Ellis Clark Lowmac then. So as you can see, this comes in a pretty snazzy box, which is made of sturdy cardboard, and it's got a pretty stylish design on the front. Let me show you the end of the box. So obviously there's a lot of Lowmacs to choose from Ellis Clark, but I went for C3002A. It is the 25-ton Lowmac, number 700709. It's in the LMS grey, and the box also tells us that this is a preserved vehicle, which is useful to have, I think, on a box. Very nice. And it is also Era 3 as an LMS wagon. And I'm not going to waste any time with this one, so let's open this up and let's take our first look. So we've got detail pack instructions. Let's open this up. Goodness, there's a lot to see here. Right, an introduction to the model. Model features, let's quickly read through this. So it's got a fully detailed die-cast frame. Hopefully then this will be a quality model. Will it be heavier than Rapido's? Could be if it's fully metal. Detailed end fittings and pipework. It's got NEM pocket combined with vacuum cylinder, replaceable with a fully detailed cylinder. Rapido's Lowmac technically doesn't have NEM pockets, so that's a potential other advantage. It's got sprung metal buffers, optional EM brake shoes, so if you're an EM modeler you can convert this one quite easily. Finely detailed etched brass detail parts and separately fitted etched brass tie-down rings. Those have been talked about a lot, so we'll talk about those later on. Brass bearings with pinpoint axles and a fully detailed chassis. We've got a history over here, pause and read that if you'd like to. And then on the back, we've got a bit about how to fit the detailing to the buffer beams. We've got removing and fitting the tension lock couplings and also fitting the cylinder instead if you want to. And then here's how you can exchange the fitted brake shoes with the EM brake shoes if that's what you want to do. So that's quite useful. That sort of walks you through everything you could possibly want to do with this. Okay, well, let's reveal the model. It's kind of packed a bit like a loco, this, with the foam. And yeah, as you can see, this is nestled in foam as opposed to the sort of clamshell. As a general rule, I prefer the clamshell because I'm not really fond of wrestling with foam, but you know, at least it's wrapped up, so that won't be an issue. Let's take a look at the accessories then. So we've got quite a bit in here, as you can see. We do have screw-link couplings, which unfortunately are not the sort of movable, pivotable ones. They're just moulded statically. Bit of a shame about that, given how much this cost, but the Rapido Lowmac did not come with couplings for the hooks, so that's an improvement, I would say. We've got the cylinders, various pipe work, NEM couplings of course, and also the EM brake shoes that you can fit instead of the pre-fitted ones. So lots of accessories there. Let's pull out the wagon itself then. Hopefully I won't damage anything doing this. No, it comes out quite easily. Let's unwrap. And yeah, goodness me, this is a great looking model and also a very, very heavy model. So yeah, sure enough, the outside of the frames here, this is all metal, it's all die cast. The Rapido model did have a fair bit of metal on it, but the actual sort of outer body, if you like, the frames, those were just plastic. So it could be that this model is the heavier of the two, and it certainly, I would say, feels a bit better quality in the hands. You get that sort of cold feeling of the metal on your fingers, which I do like a lot. But yeah, it is a beautiful model, as you can see, a lot of detail, and it does seem to be put together very nicely as well, which I like to see. But which of the two Lowmacs is heavier? Let's pop them on the scales and find out. Alright, let's start with the Ellis Clark Lowmac then. Let's see what that weighs. Pretty hefty, I reckon. So that comes in at 53 grams. 54, are we saying? Somewhere around there. Quite impressive, really, for such a slim wagon. Now, just for a recap, here's what the Rapido one weighs. Ooh, what's that? About 6 grams lighter. So when it comes to the Lowmacs themselves, it is the Ellis Clark Lowmac that is the heaviest. But of course, that's not the end of the story, because the Ellis Clark Lowmac doesn't come with a load. The Rapido one, though, does come with a load, which I did find strange, you know. It's odd that the cheapest of the two models is the one that comes with the load, but if we do add that into the equation, I wonder how that changes things. We then come in at 58 grams. So the Lowmacs themselves, Ellis Clark is the heaviest, but with the extra accessories, it is Rapido's that is the heaviest. Now, of course, if you were to add your own load to the Ellis Clark, then this would probably be the heaviest again, but I'm not going down that route. In terms of what you actually get, Rapido's is the heaviest. Right, let's take a close look at these two then and see what the differences are. So there you have it, both of the Lowmacs side by side, and honestly this makes a really interesting comparison. There's lots of subtle differences between these two, and we're going to jump into all of that in just a second. First of all though, these are both great models. I'm not going to be coming out in this video and saying one of them's terrible and the other one is great. They're both new-tooled Lowmacs, they're both modern, they're both detailed. You could buy either one of these two and be perfectly satisfied. But if you're only buying one Lowmac, which one are you going to go for? Is it going to be the more expensive Ellis Clark one or the cheaper Rapido one? So let's jump in and look at the actual differences. Let's start with the decoration. Now obviously decoration, this is not an apples to apples comparison because these two are in different liveries. But I can say that the finish is a bit different between the two. Ellis Clark have gone for a more matte finish, whereas the Rapido one is a bit more satin, so it's slightly shinier, I would say. I don't know that I have a preference. Which of the two finishes do you think is more realistic? Do comment down below and let me know. The actual printed detail though on both models is excellent. I wouldn't fault this. Both models look absolutely brilliant. The little builder's plate on the Ellis Clark Lowmac though, this is a separately fitted part. On this example, it's not got any detail on it. I don't know whether that's accurate or not. I won't pretend to know. Again, comment down below if you do know. The Rapido version is just a part of the molding though, and then it's printed onto. So I think the Ellis Clark one stands out a little bit better, but really it doesn't make that much difference. The Rapido one still looks good. So I think with the extra cost of having to make this part separately and then having to apply it, I would probably say Rapido made the smartest choice here, but yeah, admittedly the separate part does look slightly better. Let's take a look at the moulding then. So I'll pick a spot on the Ellis Clark Lowmac, so observe the sort of size of the rivets if you like, and then I'll insert the Rapido Lowmac. And yeah, I can notice quite a big difference here. The rivets on the Rapido are much, much finer. Let's jump back to Ellis Clark. Yeah, they are chunkier. So Rapido's is finest, but which is the most realistic? Well, if we look at a photo of the real thing, I think it's clear Rapido has it. So yeah, finer moulding on the Rapido, more realistic. I think because the Ellis Clark one is die-cast, they really needed to dial down the size of the rivets and the small moulded parts so that they didn't come out too large. Let's take a look at the handbrake then. So as you can see, the Ellis Clark handbrake is fitted to the model via this kind of clunky looking peg that sticks out of the chassis, which is grey coloured. And this is the Rapido one, so we don't have the peg sticking out of the chassis. We've just got the shaft sort of moulded into the handle. If we look at this great photo from Paul Bartlett, once again you can see Rapido has this right. And there's a slight difference with the way the handles are built as well. As you can see, the Rapido one is open, as is realistic, and the Ellis Clark one is blocked off. So yeah, I think attention to detail, Rapido just about has it. Let's look at the two decks then. So here is the Ellis Clark deck, and here is the Rapido deck. I think Ellis Clark has it this time. There's a lot more detail on here. The Rapido deck is die-cast, so I don't know whether that's meant that they just couldn't put the rivets on and such, or whether it's just a slightly different diagram. But there is a lot more detail on the Ellis Clark. And the Rapido version has these kind of big gaps around the outside of the deck, where the die-cast deck is fitted into the plastic body. Whereas the Ellis Clark doesn't have such large gaps, so this one looks a lot more refined on top there. Also, the Rapido model just has the moulded tie-down rings, which I think look fine, but of course the Ellis Clark ones are separately fitted. Now in my news video I said I didn't really see the point of having the separately fitted rings. Obviously they look a bit better this way, but I would rather pay less and have them moulded. But people rightly pointed out that having these rings separately fitted means that you can sort of pose them and actually use them to tie a load down to the deck. And I think that's a very fair point. So yeah, there is an advantage to having these tie down rings. That is of course if they are actually poseable. So using a needle, I'm going to very, very carefully try to pose these. Oh, it's just broken loose. Right, so not poseable, bendable maybe, but yeah, I've just broken that, so that's not recommended. Let's try the other tie downs on the side. Okay. All right, so yeah, these are more poseable. I think they are more bending than hinging, but obviously this is not something you're going to move a lot. So I suppose once you've posed them and you're happy with them, you'll be able to leave them there. So yes, you would be able to tie down a load to this. But of course, a big difference between the two models is that the Ellis Clark Lowmac doesn't come with a load and the Rapido one does. And in photos of real Lowmacs carrying wheels, it isn't these tie-down rings that are used. They're fixed down using chains which hook through these rings, which are modelled on the Rapido version. So the lack of separately fitted tie-down rings here I don't think is any disadvantage, but sure, the tie-down rings on the Ellis Clark are a great feature, but obviously you do pay quite a bit more to get the Ellis Clark Lowmac. So your mileage may vary. If you want to add a custom load and tie it down using these rings, then yeah, I think the Ellis Clark makes the most sense. For me personally though, I would rather pay less and get a load. And for me, at least from any sort of distance, the load on the Rapido Lowmac makes more of a positive difference than the separately fitted tie-down rings on the Ellis Clark, which I won't use. So these are better, but only if you use them. Let's take a look at the buffer beams then. So these are very similar, except the chains on the Rapido buffer beams, these are just part of the moulding, and the Ellis Clark chains, those are separately fitted. So that's an interesting difference. The buffers are sprung on both models, both have metal buffers, which are both sprung as you can see. There are moulding marks on the Ellis Clark buffers though, whereas the Rapido ones are much more cleanly presented, but I think that is a very, very small difference. Let's take a look at the underframes then, and as you can see, these look quite a bit different. The detail around the brake rigging though is very, very similar. So here is the Ellis Clark, and here is the Rapido. Yeah, not a huge number of differences here, but there are differences. First of all, the brake pads themselves are a lot closer to the wheel on the Ellis Clark, which makes them look a bit more realistic. On the Rapido, yeah, the brakes are a little bit further away. But with Ellis Clark putting the brakes closer to the wheels, obviously you run a greater risk of the brakes touching the wheels and causing drag. And that has happened here. One of the axles is free. As you can see, that one spins nicely. The other one though is not, and you can see, I think it's this brake shoe here that is touching the wheel slightly. So the Rapido brakes don't look quite as good because they're not as close to the wheel, but the Rapido Lowmac will be freer rolling. Obviously mileage may vary on that, but for the two examples I've got, that will be the case. We've also got the difference in coupling. Here is the Rapido coupling, which is non-NEM. We've got the NEM pocket here, but then they've got a custom tension lock, which is fitted into there. So that's non-standard, that's not brilliant. The Ellis Clark model does have a proper NEM pocket though, into which you can fit any NEM coupling you want. So that is definitely an advantage. That's a plus for Ellis Clark. Both models do have the bearings though on the axles, as you can see, so that is good as well. The underframe of the Ellis Clark model though is quite a bit less realistic than Rapido's. We've got the large and painted Clark Railworks logo, which is odd because they've gone to all the trouble of doing all this only to have the underframe unrealistic. So yeah, don't quite get that. Obviously to most people that won't make a lot of difference because you're not looking at these things from the underside as they run, but it is worth noting that the Rapido model does look completely realistic even on the underside because we've got the underside painted here and it's got the planking on it. So if we're looking at every little difference, again, I think Rapido has it. There is also a notable difference on the underframe. You can see these cross beams are much wider on the Ellis Clark, whereas they're much slimmer on the Rapido. So again, we'll turn to a photo by Paul Bartlett, brilliant photo once again, and you can see how the real structure of these Lowmacs works. Now this is a slightly different diagram to the Ellis Clark. This is a diagram 143 from 1939. The Ellis Clark is a later diagram 173 from 1944, I believe. So this is not definitive, but you can see that those beams going left to right across the Lowmac are I-beams, and it's not a single beam that goes across the chassis. It looks as though there are three separate beams. So again, Rapido's has that right. The Ellis Clark is one separate beam that goes across. Also, the Ellis Clark ones are too wide, I think. Again, looking at the photo, they're only that width at the ends of the beam where there is some bracing. On the Rapido model, you can also see where the bolts come through on the other side. Nice little touch. That is missing on the Ellis Clark model. Again, this is just another small detail, but I do find it surprising that the cheaper model does seem to have more attention to detail like this. So again, I'm nitpicking, most people won't care, but yeah, the underframe, generally speaking, is more realistic on the Rapido, at least in my opinion. You might find a different photo that shows something completely different. If you do, please do let me know. Finally, a little note on quality. Both of these models are built excellently, but there is a winner for me, at least with these two examples, and that is Rapido, because the thing is very pristine. The Ellis Clark model is built very well, and you know, it's amazing that all of these tie-down rings are so straight, but there is a bit of visible glue on the deck here, and there was none on the Rapido, so again, it's very close, but I think just about the Rapido model has it. So both Lowmacs are amazing, but as far as I can tell, I think it is the Rapido one which is slightly better. Only slightly better, and there are things that the Ellis Clark Lowmac does that are better than Rapido's. But because Rapido's is £6 cheaper, because you do get more for your money, because you do get the load, and because I think the Rapido model is slightly more accurate, I think this is my favourite, with the Ellis Clark coming a very close second. If Ellis Clark had have mustered a slightly more reasonable price for their Lowmac, then I might be inclined to say the two were closer. But anyway, that's in terms of looks. Let's get these down onto the track and see if there's any difference in performance. So here is today's test setup then down onto the track. I've picked the 08 shunter as today's loco, nice slow performer so we can really observe the Lowmacs running. And then I got the two Lowmacs set up, and the Ellis Clark Lowmac now has its couplings, as you can see. Now I probably should have done the weigh-in with the couplings fitted, but I've weighed it in again. It still weighs 54 grams with the couplings, so what I said about the weight still holds true. The couplings themselves on the Ellis Clark are not great. the coupling hooks just won't stay on. As I was handling them, each one came off about 3 times. Really annoying. Now, I believe this is Ellis Clark's first 00 wagon release, so I guess it is to be expected that there are some kinks to iron out, but yeah, coupling's a little bit of a pain to handle. I might even swap them over because one of my pet hates is coupling hooks coming out. Free rolling test, I already tested the Rapido one, of course, during its review, but I've done it again just to see how it performs today. As you can see, it rolls all the way down Gordon's Hill, stopping just past the signal box. The Ellis Clark Lowmac did not perform as well. As you can see, this one is visibly a stiffer runner, and it stops much sooner down Gordon's Hill. And of course, this is a result of the brakes being too close to the wheels. And obviously your mileage on this may vary depending on how these are assembled. So that is kind of down to luck really, but that's why as a manufacturer, you don't leave such tight tolerances on parts such as brakes. By leaving yourself a bit more headroom, you make your own luck to make sure this doesn't happen. Again, I think this is Ellis Clark's first model. You might say cut them some slack, but then again, this cost £40. It's not as though they're practically giving these away while they find their feet, so I think to hold them to a high standard on things like this is reasonable. But yeah, it's not dreadfully stiff or anything, but noticeably the cheaper Rapido Lowmac is freer rolling. And if you can't already tell, I am really starting to lean towards the Rapido because I think you get more for your money. It's a more polished model. It seems to be more accurate, certainly. Yeah, because the Ellis Clark is so much more expensive, it's not really doing it for me. I mean, I suppose depending on what you look for as a modeler, the Ellis Clark may be better, and I certainly like a lot of its features. I mean, the fact that there's more metal on it is definitely better than Rapido's. So, you know, it's not as black and white as you might think. But anyway, yeah, couplings, no problem at all there. Is everything at the same height? Yeah, it seems to be. So the coupling hook issue shouldn't be a problem once everything's down on the track. It's just if you lift the thing up, particularly if you hold it upside down or if you touch the coupling hooks, yeah, they come off very easily. But like I say, I'm sure they'll fix that as time goes on. Right, let's send this backwards over the points. Okay, already tested the Rapido last time, so that's fine. There goes the Ellis Clark, also fine. Second set. Alright, so I think apart from the free rolling thing, the performance of each seems to be pretty similar, i.e. great. So no problems over points, everything stays coupled, everything stays on the track. Yep, that looks perfect. That stupid Acura scale guard iron's still there. Goodness sake, I forgot about that. Anyway, ignore that unless it causes a derailment. No, it's okay. Let's see how they get on around the curves then. Not expecting any issues, but we'll see. Yep. Alright, so I think we've now seen everything these two wagons have to offer. And, you know, I've made up my mind. I think I know which I prefer, but it's not black and white. And there's definitely an element of subjectivity here. I think different modelers would probably come to a different conclusion on this. There's a lot to like about the Ellis Clark Lowmac. It is more detailed in that it's got more separately fitted parts and such, but from the photos I can find, it does seem to be less accurate. The moulding isn't quite as good, the underframe not as realistic. Some of the finer details I think are done better by Rapido, but it is a higher quality model than Rapido's in that there is more metal on board. So if you don't like plastic models and you prefer models to be sort of all metal, then that's another plus for Ellis Clark. For me personally though, there's a lot more advantages with Rapido's. It's significantly cheaper. You get less detail for your money in that the tie-down rings are just moulded and that kind of thing, but you get a more accurate model. I think the moulding is finer, the underframe looks better, you do get a load even though it's cheaper, which is good. If my two are anything to go by, the free rolling is slightly better on Rapido's because the brakes aren't too close to the wheels. Although the deck doesn't look as good on Rapido's. I would say the Ellis Clark deck is much better. And of course the Ellis Clark has the NEM couplings, so you've got more flexibility with couplings there, and it also comes with screw link couplings for the buffer beams and such. So there's just loads of differences, and I think which one you decide is best will really depend on what sort of modeler you are. For me, it is Rapido. I'm a bit of a cheapskate. I prefer the better value offering in this case, and I really appreciate having the load because I think that looks cool. But what do you think is the best? Please do comment down below and let me know. So I've already rated the Rapido Lowmac in its review, so now let's do some ratings for the Ellis Clark Lowmac. Level of detail I've given 4-star, which does seem a little bit harsh, but bear in mind I am comparing this with the Rapido Lowmac. So I would say this, I think the Ellis Clark Lowmac is more detailed than the Rapido Lowmac, but I also think it's true that it's less accurate than Rapido's. I've looked at a lot of photos, I'm satisfied that that is true. Obviously there's always another photo to look at, so if you think anything I've said along those lines is wrong and you can prove it, let me know and I will make an amendment. I do think though that the Ellis Clark model is less refined with its chunkier moulding, the brake handle, the underframe, etc. And of course it also doesn't come with any load, which is what earns this a lower rating on detail than I gave Rapido's. Performance 4-star, again it's got to be slightly lower than I gave Rapido's because mine isn't that free rolling. Like I say, your mileage may vary, but it's not just down to chance. Those brakes are very close to the wheels, and on mine one of them is touching. The quality I've given 4.5 star. I mean, this is a very good quality model. It is mostly metal, so it's kind of better quality in that sense than the Rapido. But there was a bit of visible glue on this model, not too much, but more than on Rapido's. The posable rings are not that posable. One of them broke as I was trying to pose it. They're not really posable, they are bendable, but they don't hinge as you might expect, so bear that in mind, don't break them. Also, coupling's not that great, they just don't retain the coupling hooks very well, so I can't give it 5-star on quality, and in fact I think maybe 4.5 is a little generous, but hey, I'm a generous man. Value for money though is the weakest aspect of the Ellis Clark Lowmac. £40 for this, that is £6 more than Rapido's, does seem very, very expensive. At £6 more, I'm not convinced you get more for your money. But it is a very, very good model and I would recommend it. Overall then, that is 7.64 out of 10. Rapido got 9.04 out of 10, so according to me, Rapido's is quite a bit better, but again, that is subjective, there is a lot to consider here. That's a grade of C for the Ellis Clark, and I think the main reason for that lowish grade is because it's so pricey. I don't mind paying a lot of money for models, but you know, if I'm paying £6 more than a model that's already quite expensive, I'd expect to really see that extra value. So if this model had come with a load, and if the moulding and the sort of accuracy of the model was the same or better than Rapido's, then I think this model would have beaten Rapido's because of the extra detail that it's got. As it is though, it's better than Rapido's in some areas and worse in others, so for me now it's not worth £6 more. Into the logbook this goes then, 9th place above the 009 De Norwick wagons and below Dapple's Top Line City coaches. Alright then folks, well that will just about do it for this review. Very interesting, and who would have thought that two models that should be so similar would actually turn out to be so different from each other. That is surprising, I think. But ultimately, I think both of these models are great. Ultimately, I think I could recommend both of these. But if you're only going to buy one Lowmac, I would say buy Rapido's. If you want a fleet of Lowmacs, then maybe a mixture of both would be worthwhile. Both have features that are worth taking advantage of, I think. For me personally, the winner is Rapido because the features and the qualities of their model appeal more to me. But obviously everybody's different, so your conclusion may be different. But if you are interested in these models, I do have affiliate links down in the description. Don't forget to comment down below and let me know what your thoughts are. Is there anything that I've missed or not considered? Please do share that with me if so. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you again very, very soon for another review. Cheers everybody.